Welcome to week 16 of the NFL season, the fantasy championships. We've come to the end of the road. If you're watching this, it's the war room, and that means you're probably still alive. If not, I don't know what's wrong with you, but either way, good luck and good work, I should say, for starters, getting to this point in the season. It's not an easy thing to do in fantasy sports. It can be a little random at this time of year, so we're going to help you try and put the best things in place this week so you can possibly hoist that trophy and send us 10% of your winnings. Of course, by we, I mean myself and Pat Thorman. Pat, what's going on today, my man?
I'm psyched to get this week rolling. It's crazy. I can't believe it's the last week. We've all probably had a pretty busy last couple of days, but there's a ton of stuff to get into this morning. A lot of potentially inactives, some injured guys, some guys that are playing hurt. So we should probably dive right in.
Yeah, of course, and I guess, well, you mentioned a couple of these guys playing hurt. Probably the biggest one's going to be Drew Brees here, and we saw that last week he was capable of playing through this injury. And with plantar fasciitis, when you have plantar fasciitis, you have that irritation underneath the foot. And oftentimes, what they actually say, and this may seem counterintuitive, but when that tears, it's actually better. It's still very painful, but it eases up some of the pressure. And so that's what he's dealing with here. We've seen some other players deal with this in the past, most notably recently Peyton Manning, but of course, longtime fantasy players will remember Antonio Gates dealing with this similar injury. But Pat, I mean, it sounds like he's going to give this a go. And what are you thinking about him today? Obviously, it's a juicy matchup in a high over/under game.
Yeah, I mean, if he's your quarterback, you're starting him. I can't imagine you have anybody that would be better. There are probably only about 5 or 6 guys that are above him in most rankings. And for DFS, I think it's a pretty good opportunity to jump on a guy in a tournament that is probably going to be pretty low owned. There are a number of other quarterbacks in good spots that are going to take a lot of ownership. People are worried about this injury, and like you mentioned, it's a high over/under game. I think it's the highest of the week, and it's not going down at this point. So Vegas thinks he's playing a full game. And there's going to be points to be scored here. So I would not run away from Brees in tournaments. I think I'd want a piece of him.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's risky, of course, but you do a Brees Cooks stack, and then on the other side of that, maybe throw Allen Hurns in there. Allen Robinson, I think the ownership percentage is going to be too high. And Hurns obviously has huge upside, and they tend to struggle a little bit against that slot receiver, which Hurns plays a lot of snaps out of the slot. So certainly potential there. It's risky, but that's what you have to do if you want to win these GPPs. So we have that. We have the big news that the Pouting Prince, Ryan Mallett, is going to be starting for the Ravens. It's week 16, I guess. Crazier things can happen, but either way, that's lots of opportunity for the Steelers' defense. I think they're going to be a top play this week for me. DFS almost 100% exposure to them in cash games. It's just too much to pass up. I really like how they've been playing recently as well, and Mallett obviously bodes well. But then again, we know Mallett can sling the rock a little bit, so I wouldn't shy away. I wouldn't feel too down on Kamar Aiken this week. I think he's still a good play. And in another game, Pat, that has some potential shootout. At least Vegas thinks so. Some shootout potential here. So thoughts on this Ryan Mallett scenario?
Yeah, I mean, Mallett's got a big arm, so I mean, you're expecting some garbage time production for Kamar Aiken. He can get downfield. Mallett can certainly reach him. The Steelers secondary is not good, and their run defense is. So these guys are going to be throwing the ball, and that's pretty obvious. So on the Steelers side, I think DeAngelo Williams is kind of a sneaky play. I mean, he's not going to be under-owned, but he's not going to be as owned as the Pittsburgh passing game will be. Everyone's going to be on Ben and Brown and Martavis Bryant, who's still really cheap. I mean, he's a cash game option. He's a guy who's been getting a ton of targets. He's another guy that you can consider in cash. But DeAngelo is going to get plenty of work. And in tournaments, I mean, Antonio Brown goes down to the 4-yard line. Who's going to get the ball? They're pushing in. Steelers get up big in the second half. Williams is going to get a lot of work. So he's a guy you probably should ignore if your first instinct in this game is the Pittsburgh passing attack.
Yeah, absolutely. I pretty much I based a lot of lineups on DeAngelo Williams this week, and we know he's been really effective when given that opportunity down by the goal line. So certainly like that call there. Chicago, we have some injury situations. Obviously, Alshon Jeffrey not going to go in this one. I think that's an uptick for Zach Miller. Eddie Royal, maybe stranger things have happened. Hopefully you won't have to rely on Eddie Royal at this point. But if you're really looking for somebody really scraping the bottom of the barrel, it's some kind of crazy deep league, and you're in a scenario where you lost Odell Beckham Jr., you had Alshon Jeffrey. Well, you could probably do worse there. Doug Baldwin, Pat, it sounds like he's going to play. And so at least you have that. But this is one of those weeks where I do think we finally see touchdown regression. Folks, you don't score at that rate at all. Like, people don't do this. This is a historic stretch, which, by the way, has completely overshadowed Ted Ginn's historic stretch. Ted Ginn has 7 touchdowns over the last 4 games. And that's a phenomenal pace as well. But Baldwin, I think we'll see some regression here. I think this is a game that, I don't know. Maybe we'll finally – wouldn't it be fitting if Christine Michael went out and had a huge day today? But I wouldn't be too overly concerned if I'm a Baldwin owner, though I did bump him down a little bit in my rankings. So what do you think about Baldwin today?
Yeah, I think he's a guy that, if you have him in a seasonal league, you're certainly playing him. You might want to get away from him in DFS. They probably don't want to aggravate the hamstring. I mean, their offense now seems to be a passing offense. I mean, they're expecting Lynch back, but they're going into the playoffs probably feeling better about their passing game than their running game. I don't think that they want to risk their best player in a game that they should probably be winning. I think, pivot, if you wanted to play that passing game, pivoting to Tyler Lockett, you can pair him with their defense, and you get the double dip scenario if he returns one. I think that's a pretty strong play. And like you mentioned, Christine Michael, he's getting the first crack at the carries. He's probably going to split a little bit with Bryce Brown. But I mean, if he starts off and he's hot and he ran pretty well last week, I would imagine that they're going to try to stick with him and see if he can carry the mail.
Yeah, definitely going to have a little exposure in GPPs to Christine Michael, not to Bryce Brown, but I think Michael, if he hits, he could hit big. We know that that's the case. We know this offense is really running the football well this season with Rawls and always with Marshawn Lynch. I think the offensive line over the second half of the season is really that secret ingredient that has helped this team become the team that's pretty darn scary entering the playoffs here. So let's hit up some of these start-sit questions. I'm sure there's plenty of players, more players we could talk about here. But let's get into these questions so we can get everybody prepped. And Georgia, of course, one of the many without Odell Beckham Jr. and has Mike Evans, Denard Robinson, Allen Robinson in the lineup. He needs one more from Sharkandrick West and Martavis Bryant. Man, can't you play them both? That's really tough. Yes, you do trust. By the way, he says, do I trust West with Wereback? Yes, you trust him. But in this case, Pat, I have Martavis Bryant as my number 4 wide receiver, so I think I'd lean towards him.
Yeah, I do too. And with Wereback, you're still going to play West in most scenarios. But like you said, this is one where Bryant's ceiling is going to be so high in this game, and West may lose goal line carries, so that kind of caps the ceiling a little bit. So yeah, I'm with you. I got Martavis 4 as well.
It's interesting though. I'd be close to tempted. It's really close between West and Denard Robinson. I mean, I'm leaning slightly towards Robinson. Very similar in that he's going to be a 3-down player. We'll see West obviously still be integrated in the passing game no matter what, and he'll get some early down work as well, plenty of that. But Robinson will get everything, and this Saints defense has been really friendly to opposing running backs, so definitely like Robinson. Don't mind doing, a lot of people are going to be on the Bortles stack this week in DFS. Don't mind using a Bortles Robinson stack. It's a little bit different than the Allen Robinson, the Denard Robinson stack, that is. A little bit different there, and you get the PPR, especially on a site like DraftKings where it's full-point PPR. And so for IDP, it says, do I like Jaquiski Tart better than Bobby Wagner? There's usually not very many scenarios where I do like a safety better than a linebacker. So despite Wagner's poor matchup, I'm still going to put Wagner in there. I would much rather prefer that in those single IDP scenarios. So sticking with that one. Jordan has a question. A half-point PPR needs to pick 2 between Sharkandrick West, Carlos Williams, and Golden Tate. This one's easy for me, Pat. I'm going with the 2 running backs here. Golden Tate, yes, performed up, but this is a game that could get really out of hand very, very, very quickly, and we could see a ton of Joique Bell and Amir Abdullah. By the way, Amir Abdullah and Joique Bell, dirt cheap against a defense that's giving up rushing touchdowns left and right. It's almost like they're a lock for two a game against this 49ers defense. So I'm not crazy. I'm not as crazy about Tate as some are this week.
Yeah, I wish we knew. I wish one of those running backs was going to get the lion's share of the carries, or we were confident, because that would be a choice play. That's my concern with Tate as well. Is his ceiling is probably capped a little bit by what San Francisco is going to push Detroit to do. Like you mentioned, it's going to probably be a lot of second half running. So I'm going with the running backs in this scenario as well.
Moving on to Vince, he says, exclamation point PPR. Is that a phonetic sound that is not contained in English? Calvin Johnson, Marcus Wheaton, or Ruben Randall. He needs to pick two. Well, obviously you're locking Calvin Johnson in. I know that we're concerned. We saw the performance last week, although I love that performance as somebody going against him. But you still have to lock him in as a fringe wide receiver one. So then it comes down to Wheaton or Ruben Randall, and really with Beckham out, it puts Randall over the top. We've seen Randall have some big games when he's had to step up. Now I'm not saying he's going to have one, but at least the ceiling is there. So I lean him over Wheaton, who's decidedly the third, maybe fourth, possibly fifth option in that offense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you throw Heath Miller into the equation, and although he has performed, with Miller on the field since that Seattle game when he went crazy when Miller wasn't there, I still think that the ceiling is kind of capped there, and Rube's going to get the targets. I mean, good luck, strap in and cross your fingers, but Rube's going to get the higher target volume.
Yeah, he is, and it's interesting. I have some exposure to him in DFS for that very reason. The volume is key. That's exactly what we want to see. So we move on to Robert Folger, and he says, "Hey PFF, hey Robert, need an RB2 this week in half-point PPR. James White, Frank Gore, Todd Gurley, and he says Gurley scares him against Seattle. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I definitely down on Gurley this week. Down on Frank Gore just because older players tend to fade throughout the course of the season. I think, given the format here, given the volume, we're not going to get a lot of work between the tackles out of White, but I think he's a kind of sneaky guy that I might go with in this game. That Pat, lots of pace in this game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for the once the Patriots kind of have an offense that's going to be funneling work to a very specific number of players. Well, normally it's tough to kind of forecast exactly where it's going to go. Now you got Gronk, you got White. You got a hobbled Brandon LaFell who's probably going to have Revis on him, and then you got Keyshawn Martin. So Gronk and White are going to be super busy, like both of them in DFS, like both of them in season long. And you got two good run defenses, so you're going to have two offenses that are going to probably be forced to a passing stance. So that's, like you said, it's going to increase the pace, more incompletes and timeouts, or clock stoppages, excuse me. So yeah, White I think is the ceiling play here. It is scary to sit Gurley. It's scary to play Gurley. But if you're feeling like pretty confident in your matchup this week, White is going to give you a safe floor.
Yeah, you look at what he's done over the last 3 weeks: 24 targets, 21 catches. He's finding the end zone. He's very much poor man's Dion Lewis, and I like him in that format. I don't think in standard. In standard, I probably would just suck it up and go Gurley, unfortunately. But the fact that you get that half point does put White over the top for me. Moving on to Sean, he's asking Kristen Michael or Michael Floyd in a flex in a standard league. Pat, I think this one's pretty easy for me, but see what you think here.
I'm going with Michael Floyd. I think Kristen Michael could have a big game, like we were saying before. If he gets off to a hot start, he might get the hot hand, and Pete might keep giving him the ball. But Floyd is going to provide you with a higher floor, and with Sam Shields out, who's going to be his primary cover guy, that's a pretty big boost in his matchup. So I like Floyd, and I like Michael too. But I think the way to go in this one's Floyd.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. Then he has a tight end decision that basically has a whole bunch of fringe TE1s. Who are all bunched up in my rankings: Will Tye, Richard Rodgers, Austin Seferian-Jenkins. And for me, I'm going to lean Will Tye. It's so close. Rodgers had that big game, but otherwise it's the same Rodgers that we get. You got to hope he scores, or you're going to get 3 for 30, 2 for 28, something like that out of him. Safarian Jenkins just isn't playing enough snaps at this point, even with Vincent Jackson out. I mean, he sees a pretty heavy target volume when he's on the field. But I do like Ty. Ty is very much a Larry Donnell, so I'm going Ty there, Pat.
I think Ty is actually an upgrade on Donnell for them. I think he's more athletic. They've been feeding him the ball. They don't have obviously Odell Beckham, so he bumps up on that target totem pole. Ty for me as well. Although they're all just like you said, they're on that fringe. They're like I think I have Ty 11, we have Rodgers like 13, and Safarian Jenkins 14. So they are close.
Yeah, it's all close. I have Safarian Jenkins just ahead of Rodgers, but yeah, basically the same kind of scenario with my rankings. Greg has a need for 3 wide receivers in a PPR. He's choosing between Marcus Wheaton, Allen Hurns, Landry, Jarvis Landry, Stephon Diggs, and Keyshawn Martin. Pat, what do you think here?
Well, I got Hurns and Landry stand out, as locks right off the bat. And I'm going to go with Diggs over Wheaton. Keyshawn Martin's tough to trust. You're not exactly sure who's going to be covering with the Jets, and he's not a guy who's really stood out to begin with. But I think Diggs should be able to get loose a couple times. So either Hurns, Landry, and Diggs out of those.
Yeah, and Teddy Bridgewater playing a lot better over the last couple of weeks here. Definitely a good matchup against the Giants defense, so I don't mind that at all. But Diggs still, let's be clear, he is still a wide receiver 3. But the other 2, I agree. Jarvis Landry, I love him today, so really plus matchup, so I'd be happy to start him. Then he needs 2 in a PPR as well with Lamar Miller, Rashad Jennings, Jeremy Hill, Christine Michael. For me, I'm going to go Miller and, it says Lamar, Miller, so I hope that's you're coming up with something else there, but I'm going Lamar Miller and Christine Michael here. Pat, what do you think?
Miller's a lock, I guess. Although he's about as dicey as they come to trust. But yeah, he's a fringe RB1 at this stage still, and those other guys are kind of pushing the RB2, RB3 zone. Rashad Jennings is a little bit interesting to me, especially if that Minnesota game doesn't mean anything for them, which is pretty possible with the scenarios the way they work out. If they do sit Linval Joseph, if they do sit Barr, Rashad Jennings could get. He's gotten more carries lately out of that timeshare. I think he is pretty close with Christine Michael. I have Christine Michael higher. I'll go with him here, but he's not far off Rashad Jennings.
Yeah, I have the same way. I have Michael just in the edge of top 20 and Jennings at the back end of the RB2s, so pretty close. I agree, but do like Michael against that St. Louis Rams defense that is a shamble, their former selves. Moving on here to James, needs to sit 2 in a PPR format. He has Denard Robinson, Jarvis Landry, Kamar Aiken, Randall Cobb, Willie Snead. You're giving us the whole lineup here, man. Carlos Williams, James White, and a partridge in a pear tree. Oh, boy. So PPR, you're sitting 2. Obviously, you're starting Landry no matter what. I think you're starting Denard Robinson no matter what. You're starting James White no matter what. Well, you almost have to start Carlos Williams no matter what there. So it comes down to the wide receivers. And you have to believe, we have to cut through the tape here. Do we believe that Patrick Peterson is going to shadow Randall Cobb? Unless you're disagreeing with my paring this down, Pat.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with that at all. And I'm actually wrestling with the same thing with Cobb in one of my final games. I have Cobb and AJ Green and Golden Tate, and I need to sit 2 of those guys. So I have Cobb in there now, but I am worried about Patrick Peterson shadowing him. I would knock Snead off the list right off the bat, just because it does. You open some risk with Breeze if he's actually going to finish the game. Snead is the number 2. Option there, so I knock him off, and then it comes down to Aiken and Cobb for me, and I would probably knock off Aiken just because you got Ryan Mallett, and roll Cobb out.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Right now, and I haven't finished my last ranking update, but I do have Aiken at 23, Cobb at 27. And that's going to be really close. I'm going to grapple. Those are 2 players who I'm going to definitely grapple with there. Boy, oh boy. Yeah, I think the Ryan Mallett factor, the fact that you look at quarterbacks, and even if he's shadowing, this is a potential game script that could get out of hand really quickly for the Packers. and we know they are capable of some garbage time, so I wouldn't mind that. Although, if you really want to differentiate, maybe we've seen target volume for Adams this season in GPPs. Take a flyer. I mean, he's cheap. It's one of those. It's really you may want to have some chalk in your lineup too. Then, but either way, yeah, I think that I would agree with that one. So that's the route I would go. And Vince is an Eagles fan, and he's sad. Okay, well, just don't be one of the Eagles fans who complains about everything. We get it. I live in Philadelphia. I'm an Eagles fan as well. We get it. You don't like Chip Kelly. You know how I know you don't like Chip Kelly? Because you told me every week 35 times all season long. Okay, we get it. We get it. And, hey, there's things to like about the team. Fletcher Cox had a heck of a game last night, and it's good to see he made the Pro Bowl this year. So there are silver linings to every single cloud. Greg has some more questions, though, too. And this looks like an IDP question. Olivier Vernon, Cliff Averill, Greg Hardy. Definitely not Greg Hardy. That experiment didn't work very well for the Cowboys. Cliff Averill is very boom or bust. And the Rams actually don't give up a lot of sacks, believe it or not. So the answer for me is going to be Olivier Vernon. He's been white hot over the last month. I think he's a solid top 10 play. Then he's asking about a safety position, Michael Griffin, Calvin Pryor, Mo Alexander, Will Allen, Harrison Smith need two. I would go Harrison Smith and Michael Griffin there. Pretty easy one for me so far. And then finally, wide receivers, Kamar Aiken or Doug Baldwin. And this is a tricky one, Pat. It's definitely tricky because of the Baldwin injury scenario. So what are you thinking here?
Well, I think it kind of comes back to your confidence in your matchup. I mean, if you're pretty confident, if you're a favorite, Kamar Aiken is going to probably give you a more secure floor. You don't have the injury risk. Well, you do have the quarterback risk. But if you're just playing it straight up, in a close matchup, I'm going Baldwin. He certainly has the higher ceiling.
And if you want some sneaky, this is a week where we can get away with some sneaky plays in DFS and save some money. Just looking down here, and Ronald Darby is going to be inactive for the Bills. That means they're without their two starting cornerbacks for the season, Stephon Gilmore and Ronald Darby. So, again, if you're looking at something sneaky, hey, you could do worse than Terrence Williams. He's dirt cheap. I mean, boy, I don't know if I'm going to make that play, but it did just occur to me that could possibly make your lineups. So, James, another question here. More upside for an underdog, Hightower or Hilton? Well, Hilton's obviously has more upside, but the fact of the matter is you want to put the players in who are going to score the most points, and I think Hightower is a pretty good play today, Pat, so I would lean Hightower over Hilton without any other information on the scoring settings of this league.
Yeah, I mean, Hilton's got that squeaky wheel thing going for him this week, because he complained that they're not throwing the ball downfield, and it's because they can't throw the ball downfield. I mean, kudos to Hasselbeck for, he's a tough guy. He's doing the best he can. He's old as I am, and he's out there getting hurt every single time he gets hit. He can't throw the ball downfield. So no matter how much Hilton wants to, or no matter how much the coaches want to, they're not going to be completing deep balls most likely. So Hightower's in a high-scoring or a high-projected total game. He can get 3 goal line carries very easily. So I think Hightower does have the most upside in general.
Yeah, and I certainly, Hilton, we've seen huge games out of him, but surprising this season is Hightower very relevant here, very much a top 10 play this week. And so James said he had Kamar Aiken in and didn't know about Cobb versus White versus Carlos Williams. Yeah, so I guess we gave you our whole scenario on that. Greg's asking a question: who had the more disappointing season, the Bills or the Eagles? The answer is the Cowboys. The answer is the Ravens. I mean, come on. You look at some of these teams this year, and it's very much been a lost year. Dallas coming in with so much potential, and unfortunately, once you lose your quarterback, it's over. Baltimore lost basically their entire starting offensive line up at the skilled positions. I mean, think about Pitta, Flacco, Forsett, Steve Smith, Rashad Perryman. I mean, come on, that's absolutely brutal. So it could always be a lot worse. Look at San Diego. San Diego had lost basically most of their skilled position players as well, with the exception of Rivers. So really tough seasons across the board for a lot of these teams. But the beauty is that next year is another year. And, of course, when we look at the trajectory here, just to fill, you guys are the hardcores. So here's what we got lined up. We're going to do some fantasy playoff stuff. Not much content next week. We'll have DFS content, of course, but season-long stuff's going to be pretty minimal. But we'll get some hardcore DFS content for the NFL playoffs. We'll get you all prepped for your fantasy playoff leagues. I'm in some that draft and all that. So, share all that good information with you. Then we'll kind of ease off in February, but we'll be right back in the mix in March. We'll do, of course, some looking back content, but February is probably one of the nice. It's nice to relax after all of this, but either way, that's the sort of trajectory. We're not going to have a war room next weekend. You shouldn't be playing your fantasy championships in week 17. So we're not doing any war room. We'll probably have some podcasts though coming up in January. We'll do some playoff podcasts, and then of course don't forget too, we're going to be diving in headlong February. I'll probably be pretty silent because I'm going to be doing a lot of college analysis. So lots of stuff coming up. Fantastic season. If you guys have any final questions, you got about a minute and a half to get them in. Otherwise, Pat, anything striking you on the news as I'm blabbering on here?
Oh, no, I kind of was just listening to what you were saying. I haven't been checking the inactives, dropping the ball over here. No, nothing is really standing out right off the bat, although Tamba Hali is among the inactives for the Chiefs. So, without Justin Houston, that game, since Cleveland can score a little bit. I was worried that they weren't going to push Kansas City to really, to not air it out necessarily, but to really kind of, get on their horse on offense. So that kind of raises Macklin's ceiling a little bit. It raises Kelsey's ceiling a little bit. So, if Manziel can put a, 14, 17, 20 points on the board, that helps your Chiefs players as well.
Yeah, and it might be a downtick if you were looking to use the Chiefs. They're pretty expensive in DFS. I wouldn't fade them in season long, but in DFS, I might look elsewhere because it's going to be tough for them to generate pressure with Frank Zombo and Dee Ford. That's a big downgrade, even from Tamba Hali and Dee Ford. So I might look elsewhere. Manziel could potentially keep them in this thing, like you said, and that's good for Macklin. I have some Macklin exposure. He's nice and cheap this week. Looking around, like I mentioned, Des Bryant, obviously we know he's out. So Terrence Williams, if you're looking for a flyer. Ruben Randall, if you're looking for a flyer. Eddie Royal, if you're looking for a flyer. Nate Washington, if you're looking for a flyer. So there are plenty of options. The craziness is about to begin. I think this is going to be one of the craziest weeks of the season. So hopefully everything breaks the right way for everybody. Like I said, we'll be back. We'll be doing some playoff podcasts and all that fun stuff. So check that out. And, of course, last second, you can hit us up on Twitter, Pat_Thorman. I am at Jeff Ratcliffe. And that's going to do it for us. So for Pro Football Focus, he's Pat, and I'm Jeff, and that's a wrap.